and welcome to Series 4 of Have We Got Planning News for You? Thank you very much indeed for joining us once again for our fresh new series, 1 year on from when it was started. Welcome also to our YouTube viewers. Please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And please do consider making a charity donation in place of registration fee. We support the NHS Charities Together and Shelter, but if you'd rather donate to a charity of your choice, that would be equally fantastic. Now, our special guest this week is Peter Freeman, chairman of Homes England, co-founder of developer Argent, whose successes include the incredible regeneration of the King's Cross area in London, which I personally enjoy visiting a lot. Peter, hello. Can you tell us where you're calling from, what choice theme you've chosen, and what, if anything, you're drinking this evening?
I'm in Holland Park, London. It's sun pouring in through the window. Lovely afternoon. I'm drinking Corona. I drank Corona before the coronavirus, and I'm sticking to it. It's really true. And the theme underlying much of my views on life is continuity and change.
Excellent. Well, we'll look forward to see what the panelists have got to contribute to that. I can't stop laughing at what Sasha's got on his head, which is more than what he normally has on his head, but maybe that's the change. And obviously, Peter, as you and our viewers will know, we will be doing our discussion with you in the second half. If anything comes up between now and then that you'd like to contribute to, please feel free to chip in, though don't feel obliged to do so. Mary, hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Isn't it fantastic? Day 1 of Series 4, and we have such a great guest, and what an interesting theme. So, Mary Cook, Town Legal in sunny Wandsworth, and I'm actually being very good. I'm not on the gin, I'm on the water. And here is my contribution to continuity and change. This is something that I fell in love with when I saw it in Cornwall, although I confess this comes from an elm tree in Girton, not a million miles away from Cambridge. And to me, wood represents continuity. And because this is obviously not a tree, to me, this represents change. So I thought of this when Peter identified his very interesting theme, continuity and change.
Fantastic. Shades of Henry Moore there, Mary. And what we're going to do for this series, rather than doing nudge and champ at the end, I'm going to ask each at the beginning, briefly, what's caught your eye in the planning news this week? So, Mary, anything particular that's caught your eye?
Well, since we last met, I've taken this a little more liberally, but basically the hot thing for me is the new MA class, the new permitted development rights, which you will remember came into force on the 21st of this month. And it means that from the 1st of August, there is a new permitted development class. So you can go from commercial, business and service, i.e. the new class E, to the new class C3 residential.
Oh, thanks, Mary. Now, normally at this juncture, I go to Paul, but I can't resist understanding what the rationale for that hat is. So, Sasha, do tell us.
I'm tempted to I'll tell you at 6 o'clock, Charlie. I think I lost a bet to Paul, so I'm now an honorary member of the majestic Selwyn College, Cambridge.
Ah, I see.
Where I used to go, this is the difference between Paul and I used to go and have supervisions in administrative law, and Mr. Lord Justice Clive Lewis told me I was a twit. And he told Paul Tucker that he will one day join him in the Court of Appeal. That's the difference between us.
What's caught your attention, Sash, to the in the news since we last all got together?
The Super League, of course.
I wonder how long it would take you.
Yeah, I haven't really been focusing on planning. I've been more worried about the future of my football club and whether they would stay as greedy or find their long lost soul, and thank goodness they did before it was too late, before we were ostracized to an extraordinary extent. So I'm welcome. Yeah, I've got to apologize corporately on behalf of Arsenal Football Club. Yeah.
Here. Paul, how are you?
Absolutely overjoyed to watch Sasha with the hat on. It moves my Selwyn heart. I'm very well, thank you, Charlie, and hello, Peter. You're very, very welcome. So firstly, drinking. I would have drunk this. This is Theakston's Old Peculiar. which is a good old Yorkshire brew, which I've not drunk since I was actually at Selwyn sometime in the 14th century. So that was going to be my continuity and change. I was going to change by drinking, etc. But unfortunately, I'm more beautiful than Charlie. And because I'm more beautiful than Charlie, I'm going to drive to Newcastle upon Tyne this evening for reasons that Charlie will understand. And in terms of what caught my eye in the news, if I can presuppose your next question, Charlie, like every good witness, it's
roll.
When I was back in the early 90s, one of the first local planning inquiries I ever did was the local plan for Scarborough, and I promoted an allocation on a really dull, boring field at Middle Deepdale, adjacent to a council estate, which is the council estate I was born on. Thought nothing more of it, and then in the last year, Keepmoat have been developing it and have been secretly digging up the most amazing Roman building, which I don't know if Rob's got a picture of it. But it's actually two buildings, one on top of another. But the second one is a big circle. It's a vast building with 4 different arms off it. All sorts of theories. Could be a very, very early Roman or late Roman church, very early Christian church. Could be a temple, but it's one of the most high status buildings to be found in the whole of the country. And I got consent for an allocation on the top of it. So thank goodness, Keepmoat and Scarborough Borough Council have revised the application. That's going to be the area of green space. But an amazing thing.
I was thinking that was your first home in Paul.
Well, given I was born very close to it, Charlie, then
Exactly.
the builders probably are my ancestors, so I can claim credit for it.
Number 1, how are you?
I'm good. I'm very good, and it's boiling hot here in Cheltenham. I don't know where it is, where you are, but it's absolutely scorching. It's fabulous. So I'm here at home with Presumption, and for my continuity theme, I've got this, okay, which is Thatcher's Zero. Now, they've been making cider in these hills for absolutely ages, eons, and we all like it. Hereford, Gloucester, Worcestershire, my lover. And so so this is old, but zero alcohol. And why am I drinking zero alcohol? Because I'm feeling really rubbish, actually. I'm not feeling very good.
Just because you've had your jab.
I have had my jab, and that's where I spoke to Peter yesterday. So that ages me instantly. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drink it out of this mug, because you know what? Although I don't support Arsenal, as you know, what is more important is that they all stay together as it is and make the greatest football league and the greatest Premiership in the world. And so I'm going to drink out of this just to show solidarity. A step too far for my son, though, Sasha. He's a Spurs fan.
Bravo, Chris. Some of us are too young to have been asked for to call up for a jab yet.
Oh, now stop bragging.
I'll get my turn yet. So Charlie Banner here, Keating Chambers. I'm afraid I'm going to lower the tone completely, because my contribution to continuity and change is about the opposite of Mary's and Paul's highbrow ones. My continuity is, once again, I've got my Deliveroo cocktail from Yaoacha, and the change is it's a different one than usual. I'm having and it's not alcohol free, unlike Chris. It's a highly masculine lychee martini, given it's a nice warm day. It got a few strange eyebrows from my clerks. They brought it up earlier on this evening. Chris, I didn't ask you what caught your eye in the planning news. So
Okay, well, First Homes, this new First Homes policy.
We're going to talk about that in a moment.
You're going to talk about that a bit later, but the government are putting flesh on the bones. They're obviously trying to win over a certain type of voter, and so they've introduced First Homes as a policy to try and spread out what can be considered affordable housing. And it's very interesting. And I suspect we're going to see a lot of it, particularly because it doesn't need to be on allocated sites. And there's no size limit. So I think we're going to see a lot of speculative applications, which generally is good for the 5 of us.
Indeed so, and more on that in a few moments' time. What caught my eye this week actually was the story in today's Times that, so we're told by the Times, relying on research commissioned by the CPRE, no less, whose CEO is our guest next week. Planning permission has been granted for development on average twice as much, 294 acres of greenfield in AONBs per year, compared to the position in 2017 when about 128 acres a year were granted. That's the headline statistic. It would be interesting to explore the detail of those stats. One can't help but think, as an initial reaction, if those stats are accurate, that thanks to politics, it's easier to get permission now in an AONB than it is in the Greenbelt, despite the fact that AONB is environmentally more sensitive.
Charlie, hang on. My next 2 appeals are in AONBs. So let's just take the view that it's easier than Greenbelt, shall we?
Indeed. Hold that thought. Indeed so. So it'll be interesting to hear what CPRE's CEO has to say next week about that. Now, for our first planning appeal report, Sasha, you're going to take us to Harrogate, the MSA decision, which is, I think, round 3 or round 4 of a 2 decades old MSA battle, which I was involved in many, many years ago.
Me too.
About that.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I do that, I'm a bit cheesed off that I wasn't invited to the Donald Trump garage sale when he sold his chair from the Oval Office.
Oh, that's low.
I'm not sure it is, actually.
I've got the hair already, so I thought go in for penny, in for pound.
Oh dear, well, you'll show us the Churchill bust in a minute.
Yes, it's just around the corner, actually.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about Harrogate, and I'm going to talk about the long-running saga of MSA provision in this country. And I, like you, have done old enough and remember when there was a surfeit of MSA inquiries, and I'm still bitter that my proposal between 15 and 16 on the M25 didn't get consent when it absolutely should have done. Now, I'm delighted about this. This is MSA between Wetherby and Durham. All of you with a son in Edinburgh and a son in Durham, we all have this problem where the bloody L1 stops on the A1 when you're going north. And these 2 proposals were to solve that problem. And there were 2 rival proposals, one by Apple Green, we can see, Appeal A, and Appeal B is by Motto. So one's Vale of York, the other was Ripon. What distinguished them is the Apple Green proposal was online, and effectively online means you just drive straight off the A1. The other one, the Ripon one, required you to go into a junction, effectively. It was a junction service area. So David Rose, who's a fabulous inspector, one of the most experienced and good inspectors in my humble opinion, I had the pleasure of dealing with Rodri Price-Lewis, who is, I just want to give him a shout out because this was his last ever appeal after 46 years at the planning bar, one of my dearest friends. And he was successful in getting consent. And I think the important points I'd make is that, of course, the recognition of need for MSAs. As I've just said, Durham is 61 miles north of Wetherby. And there is the rather peculiar, all of us have stopped at Leeming Bar, which is a kind of, well, I don't want to get an injunction against me or libel action, but not, let's just put it like this, not the strongest service station on the network.
Chip shop in a lay-by?
Yeah, that's being complimentary, I think.
I'm only joking, obviously. Yeah. It's a good service. It's very good.
Anyway, the important takeaways are recognition. Anybody who's thinking about an MSA, clear acknowledgement by the inspector that there is a need for further provision. That justified one of the 2 proposals. Common ground that only one should get consent. Secondly, landscape visual effects. And I would say for an MSA, and what was sought to be provided, a pretty robust conclusion on the landscape and visual effects of the Apple Green proposal, unlike the Motto, which was considered to have some significant landscape and visual harm. Also, loss of agricultural land was a score draw between the 2. Heritage was slightly lost by Apple Green, which is interesting for those fans of 196. And also, I think for all of us who are involved in the planning system, and Peter will find this particularly of interest, local opposition. There was a Rule 6 party very strongly against the Apple Green proposal. And the inspector, I'm just going to read it out because it's one of the great summaries, which we all say, because I know everyone worries about where local opposition sits. And the inspector concluded, nevertheless, opposition by itself, however strong, does not determine the outcome of an application unless it is based on sound planning grounds. My analysis of the main issues and other matters raised demonstrates that a number of the concerns raised locally are not borne out following consideration of all the evidence before me. I think that is genuinely one of the most articulate, succinct and accurate summaries of how to deal with third-party concerns about planning matters that I've ever had the pleasure to read. So the overall takeaway is the grant for the Apple Green proposal, and please God, it will be implemented in the next 2 to 3 years, and we can all enjoy stopping there on our way to the joys of the north of England. Thank you, Charlie.
Thanks, Sasha. Well, I'm going to deal with the second planning appeal. This concerns a appeal in the London Borough of Bromley, a site known as the Footsie Social Club in Lower Sydenham. And this is an appeal by Dylan 2 Limited concerning a proposed 4 to 11-storey development on metropolitan open land in Bromley. The site was previously a sports ground for employees of the textile dye company Dylon International. Permission had been granted on appeal in 2019 for a somewhat smaller scale scheme of up to 9 stories. And through this appeal, the developer sought consent for a larger version. The case has a double link to the show, as the scheme architect was Ian Ritchie, one of our previous guests, and our very own Chris acted for the appellant. Unfortunately for them, the appeal was allowed. I think the most important and interesting aspects of the decision for future cases are as follows. It was agreed, and the inspector endorsed that agreement, that Metropolitan Open Land Policy wasn't a NPPF paragraph 11D1 policy, i.e. a policy which protects areas or assets of particular importance, the application of which can disapply the tilted balance if they provide a clear reason for refusal. And this was because under the terms of 11D1, only the policies in the framework count for this purpose. And MOL, whilst analogous to Greenbelt, is a development plan concept. I'm assuming that was why it was common ground and agreed. But interestingly, that's one aspect in which MOL actually now has a lesser degree of protection to the Greenbelt, because it doesn't engage that disapplication of the tilted balance. The appeal scheme the inspector thought wouldn't have materially greater visual impact or impact on openness than the 2019 scheme, and it was, the inspector said, of the, quote, same exceptional quality noted by the 2019 inspector, bravo Ian Ritchie, and that clearly weighed heavily in the inspector's mind. This is a really great design. The housing supply position had decreased considerably since 2019. It was now between 2.9 and 3.3 compared to 4.15 before. And the inspector, Paul Singleton, considered that 2.9 to 3.3 to be, in his words, a very significant shortfall to which very substantial weight should be accorded. In relation to affordable housing, there'd been a cumulative shortfall in Bromley of no fewer than 12,636 units since 2011. That's a small stadium full of cumulative affordable housing shortfall. And Inspector Singleton said, by any measure, that performance can fairly be described as woeful. The proposed tenure of affordable housing was a matter of some significance. It was discount market sales housing in the form of first homes, to which Chris was mentioning a little bit earlier, with a sale price of at least 20% below market value. Inspector Singleton considered that qualified as affordable housing within the definition of the framework and amounted to intermediate housing. The council had an in-principle objection to first homes. Really, there would seem to me to be 2 layers to this. They said, firstly, that it was inappropriate pending the outcome of the government's planned pilot to ensure that the first homes project achieves the state objective. As to that, Inspector Singleton said there was no indication that government considered that developers and local authorities shouldn't make use of first homes in the interim period. Secondly, the council said that it would sort of tie their hands for him to accept first homes before the council themselves had got a policy for it, as to which he said, if you don't like what I say, go and get a policy of your own, essentially. My words, not his, but he thought that in the absence of them having taken a view, it was legitimate for him to consider the appeal on the basis of the framework definition. The council's affordable housing development plan policy required 35% affordable housing with a 60-40 split between affordable rented and intermediate, unless an alternative mix was justified on viability grounds. And as to that, the scheme was 19% affordable housing and all intermediate, all first homes. The inspector thought there was some conflict with policy here because the viability evidence indicated a scheme with 19% shared ownership as opposed to first homes would generate a higher residual land value, which could have supported more affordable housing. However, Importantly, however, notwithstanding this, the benefits in the inspector's view of the development clearly outweighed the harm to the MOL, so as to generate very special circumstances under the development plan. And applying the framework, paragraph 11, tilt balance, the adverse impacts didn't significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. Therefore, permission was granted despite the slight mismatch between the tenure split and what the development plan required. I would humbly suggest that is a pragmatic and impressive decision in which, in the context of the dire affordable housing shortfall, the inspector recognised the value of the bird in the hand. So well done, Inspector Sims, and well done, Ian Ritchie, and well done, Chris. And now, Paul, you're going to tell us about the third appeal that we're going to be covering this week.
I am, but I've just got two comments just to make. The first is which arises from Sasha's point of the quotation from the MSA case. There was a case that I was told about at the very start of my career, which I threw around, which members of the audience might want to know, called Noble against Glasgow City Council, where the Court of Session dealt with the proposition about objections. And there were 96 objections, all of which were objecting for the sake of objections. And the Court of Session said 96 times nothing is still nothing. And Andrew Gilbert used to roll that out at inquiry after inquiry. And the second and most important thing I've got to say all night is, your clerks bring you drinks, Charlie. What on earth are you paying them?
No comment.
Well, anyway, the case that I'm dealing with is a proposal for 250 homes at Winterfield Lane, East Malling, which was allowed on the 22nd of March, 2021, a couple of weeks ago, by Inspector Anne Jordan. An inquiry held in the first week of December, and it was the clash of the giants, and I do mean this, two wonderful people, two incredible intellectuals and great barristers. So Sasha for the appellants, Tom Cosgrove for the authority. Would have made entertaining viewing. I wish I'd tuned in. But there were a number of different issues that arose. I'm not going to talk about prematurity, best and most versatile land. I am going to talk about housing land supply, gap, and landscape. Landscape, essentially, that there was some harm to landscape, but it was outweighed by other factors. But what's extraordinary is the level of detail that Madam Inspector Jordan went into in terms of the landscape argument. And I do wonder sometimes whether inspectors' decisions do go into a little bit too much detail in relation to the site specifics, because they are meant to be to an informed audience. But so landscape was that. There was an entertaining little gap argument. It's entertaining because the settlements in question were East Malling, Larkfield and Leybourne, which are collectively known as the Medway Gap. So it was the gap between Medway Gap and West Malling, and a gap between a gap essentially was the argument. And again, I think if Rob's got the picture of the location, you can see what the gap actually is between the gap and the gap. Obviously, the one gap is built gap and the other isn't. You can see it's right in the middle. It's the red area. But it was concluded that a reduction in the actual gap didn't mean that there was a reduction in the perceptual gap following the Eastleigh principles. So well done in winning that point. But the really interesting point is the housing land supply issue, because the argument that was being run by the council was that there was a 4.6 year supply, but a good chunk of the council's supply, 4.3 year supply, but a good chunk of the council's supply was derived from sites which came forward after the base date. And what the inspector said was, well, you can use information about sites which were known and are counted at the base date, but not feed in additional sites that were consented afterwards, because then you'd have to rebase the entire exercise. Now, we were arguing those points 10 years ago. What astounds me, to be blunt, is that there isn't some noddy guide to how to do 5-year land supply that the ministry could issue in addition to PPG that tells one how to do it, because you get these points coming up time and time again, like oversupply and how you treat oversupply. To just give an indication to an authority, don't run this point, that's not how you do it, rather than doing the battle of the appeal decisions. So that was one, because rightly, Madam Inspector Jordan found don't try and add in additional points. That's the scheme, well related to the open countryside and not taking account of the gap. But what Madam Inspector Jordan basically said was, don't try and rebase without doing the job properly. And it would be really helpful to have something authoritative that says that in terms. And if not in PPG, can DCLG just please issue, DHCLG just issue some good practice guide, please. So well done, Sash.
Well done, Sash.
Thanks, Paul. Chris, you're going to take us to London and Kew Gardens.
I am. I just need to tell Paul it's Malling, West Malling. Just saying.
Not where I'm from.
Yeah, but it is where they're from. The in terms of everybody, yeah, all right. Everybody is desperate to hear Peter, and so I'm going to keep this really short. My appeal is an appeal from Brentford in London. I think if Rob just brings up the appeal decision, a decision of the Secretary of State. The inspector was Michael Boniface, and as you can see, it was for the demolition of an existing office building, arts and craft building, to create 193 new dwellings. And I think we've got a picture of the existing site. This is that's my favourite picture of an existing site so far in the series. I am not a car park. Okay.
Is it a non-designated heritage asset?
Yes, this is yeah. So that's part of Kew Gardens, as you know. No, the issues in the case were largely about heritage, and the inspector recommended approval, and the Secretary of State agreed. The harm that was identified was considered to be relatively minor, including to Kew Gardens. It would have an effect on the setting of Kew Gardens as a whole. And the setting of the designated heritage assets within it, but it was considered to be pretty low key. The change to the setting of the Royal Botanical Gardens would be minor. So it was all taken into account, and permission was granted. So well done to Russell Harris, who was instructed by Tom Horn from DP9. The development, I think we've got a photograph of the development, what that looks like. There we go. Looks lovely, doesn't it? Now, the most significant thing about this case, I think, and Tom, the consultant, agrees with me, is that this was approved by the council. So the application was submitted in August 2017, and it's taken until March 2021 to actually get a decision. It was called in 2 years ago in April 2019. So it has taken 4 years from the application to actually getting a decision. It didn't provide all the affordable housing that was needed, but there was a viability assessment accepted by the council. Why on earth does it have to take this long? You know, even the inquiry was back in October 2020. It's just ludicrous, isn't it? Absolutely ludicrous. Why was it called in? I don't know. It just seems like a spectacular waste of time.
Hear, hear. Thanks, Chris. Now, Mary, you're going to introduce Peter and kick off our discussion with him, so I'll pass over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Peter, for waiting so very patiently. So I'd just like to start if I may. You're very generous. You're very generous. I'd just like to start by introducing you a little to our audience. So, Peter, you founded in 1981 with your brother, Argent, that little unknown company. Relatively successful. You were a member of the British Property Federation Policy Committee for between 1995 and 2002. You were a non-executive director of Landsec for a couple of years in 2002 to 4. You were chairman of the Investment Property Forum 2007-8, member of the Bank of England Property Forum. You were a founder of Mayfield Market Town Limited. You were awarded a CBE for services to property and homes in London 2020. And of course, now you are the chair of Homes England, a post you've held since October 2020. To my mind, Peter, that makes you a bit of a superstar, and you're also very charming with it. So thank you so much for your time coming onto the show. My questions. You read history and became a lawyer. What attracted you and your brother to the development industry and to forming Argent back in the early 1980s? And looking back, has history and your legal training enabled you, do you think, to bring a different perspective to the development industry?
If I'd made a good lawyer, I might have stayed as a lawyer, but I couldn't have cut the mustard. So I also thought the clients had much more fun, and the heads of terms was the exciting bit of the documentation, and then you had to implement it, and writing out the full documents and going into more and more drafts didn't seem my skill set. So I became a client. My brother and I actually formed two businesses on the same day, and we made two of Channel 4's first dramas, and we did our first property development in our first 2 years. And what the films and the property have together is you actually make a product that people can see, hopefully pay for. They didn't pay much for the films. They paid more for the building. And so we desperately wanted to make product and make product that was profitable. And as for the history and the law, I think the history taught us that there's a cycle, so that we were better than some developers at saying enough, let's sell out while the market's good. And when it went to the bottom, we were better at saying, actually, it will come back and we'll buy in again. On the law, I actually think setting up heads of terms, especially when you do a lot of joint ventures, is critical. And I think the sort of legal training with a certain amount of what if, and let's not just say it's 50-50, let's work out what happens if we can't each put up our share, or it takes longer, or the 10 goes bust, or whatever, is a good training.
What has been your guiding philosophy over the last 40 years or so? And have you stuck to it, or have you had to make some compromises?
I think we have stuck to it, and it's probably been a sort of sense of self-challenge that what we want to do is quality, and what we want to do is harder and bigger than what we did before. So we started with 5,000 foot in Southampton, and we ended up with 8 million square feet at King's Cross. And each sort of few years has been a stretch beyond what we did in the previous few years. In terms of compromise, I don't like the word compromise, because it sort of sounds like somebody gave in or conceded. I think on most things, if you work well with people, you can actually find the best solution.
Yes, maybe compromise, collaboration is a more positive expression of it.
Yeah.
Okay. I think this is a tricky one, but what's the biggest single factor in the success, do you think, of schemes such as Brindley Place and King's Cross?
You couldn't do them at all unless the land was assembled. So in a sense, scale is perhaps the biggest factor. And behind scale, or with scale, you can then do mixed use and you can do placemaking. So if public authorities hadn't CPO'd the land for Brindley Place and King's Cross, we couldn't have made them happen. What we could do then is put in a firm master plan, which made it largely pedestrianised, mixed the uses, made it a 7-day-a-week place, and took the view that the public open space was the primary factor. The buildings might come and go, they might last 50 years or 100 years, but probably not forever, but the public open space should define it and the events in them.
So, I mean, those are both very positive stories about collaboration with the public sector, because it's only the public sector that has the CPO powers in the first place, and then the public sector collaborating. It might have been a little harder at times to get the permissions you wanted, but in the end, it was collaboration, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think the first planning performance agreement we entered into was on King's Cross, and Camden were fabulous. We met and we hammered everything out. And we had a great Section 106, which promised a lot, and we wanted to deliver a lot. Much of that was placemaking and both socially and commercially good. But Islington wouldn't collaborate, or the councillors wouldn't collaborate, and we had to go to appeal on the 3 acres.
Yeah.
Islington.
Okay, well, moving forward rapidly to the 21st century and Homes England, can you tell us, please, what exactly does Homes England do, and for whom?
It does loads. The taxpayer and the government should be really grateful to have it. I think one of the reasons people aren't sure what it does is it's a sort of reinvention and a redefinition of the Commission for the New Towns, the Housing Corporation, English Partnerships, the HCA. In fact, it is a rename of the HCA. In its current form, it has primarily been asked to help bring housing land forward, get the housing land numbers up. But as a sort of subset of that, it is the body that outside London gives all the grant to housing associations. It's a body that makes loans to about 350 SME house builders to keep diversity going in the providers of housing. It's the body that hands out infrastructure funding to both some developers, but primarily in a sense to local authorities to enable land for many developers. And it is in itself the buyer of land where market failure, like in the Burgess Hill Northern Arc, there'd been a site there with 3 major developers, and they just hadn't got it together to bring it forward because of the shared infrastructure costs, which they wouldn't share. So Homes England goes in, buys it off all of them, and then puts in the infrastructure and makes it happen. So in different ways, whether we're giving grants, whether we're putting in loans, whether we're buying land ourselves as principal, and sometimes simply by giving kind of consultancy advice to a local authority, brokering relationships between landowners and local authorities, we help bring land forward.
What, Peter, are your priorities moving forward?
To an extent, I'm probably speaking personal priorities, and as the months go by and there's the next spending review, I will kind of know how much those priorities have landed with government. And overall, my job is to make Homes England perform as well as it can. But I have some priorities or ideas which I think may help it to deliver more. And I suppose almost the first priority is to build a really good relationship with MHCLG and the Treasury, because they are the paymaster and give us the firepower and the ability to do it. But I think that, going back to what I said about Brindley Place and King's Cross, the public sector can assemble land much better than the private sector. The public sector in assembling land ought to be closer to the planning side of things. So I think to the extent the country wants major schemes, whether they're major urban regeneration or they're new towns, it's something that Homes England can really lean into. And if the government will kind of give us the go, we will try and make more new towns happen, more major urban regeneration schemes happen. You know, we're doing Northstowe, which is actually the biggest new town since Milton Keynes, but it's only 10,000 homes and it's only one. We're doing York Central, which is one of the biggest urban regeneration schemes in the country, but we should be helping more of those come to the market. We shouldn't be hogging them. We should be bringing in the private sector, but we should drive them at the front.
I'll restrain myself from launching into a diatribe about York's local plan for the moment, and because that would be selfish, and open this up, if I may, to Sasha first. Sasha, what's your question for Peter, please?
Thank you, Mary. Yes, Peter, Mary's asked you about the short and medium. I just want to ask if you can share with our viewers the long-term vision, strategic vision of Homes England. I mean, do you see yourself with success and over a long time period potentially to be delivering 10, 20,000 units per annum?
Well, the first issue is we don't actually deliver any units. We are not a house builder. And I think there is a strong case for saying we shouldn't be a house builder. While there is market failure in bringing land together and assembling it, in bringing in mixed use, in putting in heavy infrastructure and remediating, I don't think there's any inability of the market to build and produce units if the land is sorted. So in terms of how many we should be enabling, at the moment, in one way or another, probably about 30,000, maybe slightly more homes a year have our fingers in the pie, so to speak. Whether that's fingers in the pie because we gave some funding to a housing association, whether it's because we bought the land and resold it into the market, whether we put the money in for the infrastructure, at least 30,000 homes a year. On a good day, we might argue 50,000 have in some way had our touch. And I think that's a pretty impressive achievement anyway. But you know, clearly, as I said about my archery career, pushing that further if we can, pushing it more into some schemes that are exemplary and produce more public benefit, bringing in schemes where they are particularly sustainable, particularly well designed, have fantastic landscape. If we can help up the game for the whole country and not actually compete as builders, that would be great.
Thank you.
Paul, what's your question?
Peter, cards on the table. When I started off in my career back in the early 1990s, it was at a time when the Commission, Charlie was in primary school then, he may not have even made it, but the Commission for New Towns was winding down in Warrington, in Central Lancs, in Skelmersdale, and I was dealing with all the Section 9.1 and 9.1 and 9.2 consents and the consequence of that. But I was new to planning, and it seemed to me like a really good idea that was really, really working. All the area around Gillibrand, around Chorley was really, really working, and it was all being shelved. is there an argument for going back to the world as it was when we were promoting Central Lancs Newtown, or commissioned for Newtown stuff, and using the Newtowns Act rather more than we do?
I mean, I won't be too statutory because I'm not a planning lawyer about the acts or the mechanisms, although as I understand it, within the Housing Corporation Act, which is the thing that set up Homes England, we actually have pretty much the same powers as the New Towns Act. But my understanding is effectively government has to say to us, please go and use them. And in the revised 2017 New Towns Act, in effect, a local authority can invite government to come and help and set up a new town in their patch. I'd be hugely in favour because of the things I said about the blockage on land assembly and planning, and because I believe that you can do things so much better when they are holistic and planned from day one. Master plan doesn't have to be a rigid grid. It doesn't have to be Manhattan, but a master plan needs to knit areas together. And what I think is so miserable is the number of new housing developments of 50, 100, 250 units that are in effect a cul-de-sac. And they are from day one born to be car driven. And if you can lay out a master plan for 10,000 or 15,000 homes, which link with lots of different ways to schools and shops and jobs and parks and playgrounds, that has to be better.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Let's hope that more take you up on that, because I have to say, a simple guide for authorities that are a little bit frightened of sort of former Newtowns type powers seems to be the prevailing experience that I have. So, but great, if that's the lead from the top, fantastic, bring it on.
I have a general sense that you probably need less new legislation than you need leadership and determination.
Yeah, and action, because as you said earlier, apart from Northstowe, we haven't done one since Milton Keynes, and yet we've been hearing about housing crises, for decades. Actually, I've been around for decades. No. I digress. Charlie, your question, please.
Before I ask my question, I must say that as somebody who grew up in Birmingham, who still has family there, but I'm a massive fan of Brindley Place. When I was at school there, 1998, I spent many a happy hour of underage drinking in Brindley Place. It was the only nice bit of Birmingham back then. And I saw in the Millennium at a wonderful bar, I wonder if any of our viewers remember it, called Via Vita, and travesty. It was replaced by the Pitch and Piano over World War I later on, but it was a wonderful bar there where I enjoyed singing New Year's Eve 1999. Cat Dini.
Get on with it, Charlie. Get on with it.
And your question is.
I reminisce. Happy days. My question goes back to the Planning for the Future white paper, actually, Peter. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on whether you think that if the white paper proposals are enacted in broadly the form as proposed, they will lead to increase. What do you think they'll lead to? Increased housing delivery, and in particular, increased delivery of the kinds of homes that are most needed?
Well, as Kit Kat was to some extent the author, I'm sure it's really good. And it was a very, very well presented document, and it does make sense. But I probably have one concern, which I hope will get ironed out. That if you read the white paper, it does look a bit like the emphasis is on infrastructure levy all day long and no Section 106. And for the sort of major schemes we've just been talking about, I'd give a partial political plug on behalf of Section 106 as being relevant to the scheme and helping deliver the scheme. And I also worry that as drafted, the white paper might imply that most affordable is offside. Just turning things into money and assuming a local authority will deliver them is not, to my mind, a certain route.
Thank you.
I share those views. Chris, your question.
Yes, yeah, of course. I just observed with I know Paul loves the New Towns Act. I think the slight concern about it, if you were promoting a new town, hypothetically, is that they're concerned about the democratic process in relation to the New Town Act. The local authority would have to want to do it. And new towns are being delivered. Paul knows this. New towns are being delivered through the plan process. Look at the example of Cattle in Harrogate. They are being achieved, but they need to be, and Paul agrees with me with this, I'm sure, they need to be done as broad locations and not relied upon for supply in the immediate years, because what they need, Peter, is leadership. That is exactly what Newtown's now. I couldn't agree with you more. My question, though, and I go to Brindley Place plenty, but I'm not going to tell you all the stories about my youth spent around there. Charlie, thank you.
Is that the Secretary of State?
What's a bill then?
Yes, he went to SeaWorld, I think, as a child.
I'll tell you a story about SeaWorld. We didn't want them. But the council wanted them. So we said to them, you can only come if you have a building designed by Foster's or Rogers or Veal. And so we got Foster's to design a building. I suspect it's the one building Foster's has never, ever put in any brochure or publicity.
Well, you may say that, Peter, but if you've got screaming kids on a wet Sunday, that place is heaven. Okay. My question is, I saw a headline recently, government agency seeks affordable housing partners. Homes England is seeking ambitious strategic partners that can deliver affordable housing at scale. So can I ask you, who is that aimed at, and what are you seeking to achieve? What's your policy on affordable?
Okay, well, the government has very generously given us 7.4 billion to spend in the next 5 years, invest in the next 5 years in affordable housing. We effectively invest it outside London. The GLA has another sum which they invest in London. And we invest it in a number of ways. We have about 25 strategic partners, and that you can sort of ask to be a strategic partner, and it's based on the kind of scale that you can realistically deliver. And the idea with strategic partners is they are so likely to produce 1,000 or 2,000 homes or whatever it is a year, that it's worth giving them, in a sense, a generalized pot of money rather than a kind of site-specific pot of money. And they can bring things forward as they go, but they know they've got a sort of funding envelope. We work with, I think, about another 300 or 400 people on housing grant. Those are not only housing associations, they are local authorities, and some of them are for-profit now. Housing associations, people like Legal and General, have a for-profit arm. And about 50% of the affordable housing programme goes towards shared ownership, and the balance is social rent and other forms of sort of discounted rent. It should produce 130,000 extra homes over the next 5 years. So it's quite a meaty commitment, and very good people to work with for social purpose.
Can I just ask, when you said strategic partners, so who do you, is that housing associations generally, or?
So most of them will be the major housing associations.
Okay, but the government is probably, consistent with everything else, looking for new entrants into that market, are they? They're looking, they would welcome new entrants into the provision of affordable housing?
There are new entrants, in particular the for-profit people like the L&G Group.
Yeah.
But what I should stress is I think it's only about a third of the overall money goes to the strategic partners.
Right.
So 2/3 is available for anybody who comes with a sensible application during the whole 5-year period.
Okay, thank you, Mary.
But sorry, can we just continue this? Because I think, Chris, your point about new entrants is a really good one. I've always wanted to see more of the big pension funds getting involved in that sort of product. And I used to think, why have we got these big old retail parks with not so many people actually visiting them? When are the owners of those parks going to think think big, as it were? And maybe one of the upsides of the last year might be that there's a bit more quick thinking on how to repurpose some of these spaces, because we do need some new players into the market to help deliver. We're not going to have just the existing players being able to physically do the delivery, setting aside all the planning problems.
Right. When I was talking about all the box of tricks earlier and some of our equity investments, are, in a sense, cornerstone investments in funds. So, for example, on affordable housing, we put 10 million into a fund led by M&G and 20 million into a fund led by Manco. And both of those funds together will probably end up raising at least $1 billion. And that's for affordable housing. So we're there to help and encourage and lend our name to it if very credible partners can raise large sums. On your comment about the retail warehouses. It's always astonished me. My local big Tesco's is the one on the Cromwell Road, which was built with, I think, about 400 Notting Hill Housing Association flats above. And it does seem crazy how few single-story retail superstores or retail warehouse parks have residential above.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also interesting that the supermarkets actually have been ahead of the game compared to the owners of the retail parks. I don't know whether that's about controlling more your own space, as it were, and not having being the freeholder and having leaseholders. There are obviously more complex property issues that come into play there. May I just ask you one other question? If you were looking at your 25-year-old self, what would you say to your 25-year-old self? What would be the best bit of career advice you could give to your 25-year-old self? Because we've got lots of youngsters that watch this program. We've got planners, we've got lawyers, we've got all sorts of youngsters. What would your advice be to that 25-year-old or those 25-year-olds?
Well, I personally have 5 children who go from 37 to 20, nearly 21. And I don't suppose they'd ever have taken any of my advice. The oldest is paediatrician, the youngest is studying engineering at Cornell. And I was talking to him earlier today because he's thinking, do I really want to be doing engineering? I'm in year 1. And I think it's just so hard because, you've probably got 40, 45, 50 years possibly of useful career ahead. You might do a second or a third degree and you might change your mind. I think probably the only real thing is don't do something that you don't enjoy. My fourth daughter was just about to leave university and she's going to do Teach First. And she was offered a job that was much better paid in business. And she thought, I don't want to do it. And she doesn't know that she wants to be a teacher forever, but she felt that the Teach First program for 2 years just felt like her. And I think you should always feel like you.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice. I also think it's good advice to a 25-year-old that it's perfectly all right to try something.
Yeah.
Then discover maybe it's not your thing, and then try something else. I feel probably certainly us panelists have been barristers all our life. We haven't really done anything else. You've done all sorts of things, as is plain from the intro. But I feel today's 25-year-olds will probably be doing 1, 2, 3 different things in their lifetime, which is a good thing. Anyway,
you're young.
Thank you so much, Peter, for answering our questions. Back to you, Charlie.
Thanks, Mary. What a brilliant note on which to end our first episode of this series. Thank you, Mary, and thanks, Peter, from me and on behalf of all our viewers. That was really fascinating insight. We're really grateful for you joining us. That's all for this week. Next week, Thursday, whatever it is, the 29th of April. Nearly slipped there. Got through the episode without any false pretenses. We have the Chief Executive of CPRE, the Campaign to Protect Rural England, Crispin Truman. We're really looking forward to hearing his perspective on the planning system.
Charlie, yeah. I'm really sorry to interrupt. Peter, if you had a question for the CPRE, what would it be?
Well, I think it would be putting a burden on them. It would be saying to them, for every 1 you object to, or at least for every 5 you object to, find a scheme that you can truly support because it is really well designed and it's benefited. And if you haven't supported one and you turn 5 down, then you should hold your peace.
Very good.
We'll pass it on. I'd like to
follow that up next week. Thank you again, Peter. Thank you, dear viewers, for watching both live and on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. We'll see you next week. Have a lovely evening. Enjoy the sunshine.
Bye-bye. Thank you,
Cheers.
sir.
Cheers. Thank you,
Thank you, Peter.